Okay, so hello everybody. Welcome to the session about Entity Framework Core. My name is Tomas Herceg. I'm from the Czech Republic. I'm Microsoft MVP, Microsoft Regional Director, and I'm a CEO of Riganti, a small company which does software development and consulting. If you look at the NuGet, at the details about Entity Framework package, you can see that the last stable version, 6.1.3, has been released more than 1 year ago. It's a year and a half or something like that. And maybe a question pops out, is Entity Framework dead? I hope it's not. And the reason for this situation, that for more than 18 months there were no stable version of classic Entity Framework, is that the Entity Framework team was hard working on a new version, Entity Framework Core. Now they have most of the work done. There are a lot of features which are still missing in Entity Framework Core, but they are now returning to continue working on this version. So it's not like that the classic Entity Framework is dead. It's only the work has been postponed for a couple of months because of the Entity Framework Core. Okay, so this session will be about what's changed, what's new in Entity Framework Core, and if you can use it right now, and on what conditions or circumstances. Okay, so why Microsoft brought this new version, Entity Framework Core? On their website, they say that it's lightweight, extensible, and cross-platform. The most important thing is the cross-platform, because .NET Core doesn't contain all the API needed to run the classic Entity Framework. So this is a lightweight version which uses only the API which is present on .NET Core. And since .NET Core and .NET Framework are compatible, there is a common subset. It's called .NET Standard. So if the Entity Framework Core uses only the API described in .NET Standard, it will be you can use it in both .NET Framework and .NET Core applications. And since .NET Core powers, for example, universal Windows platform applications, or ASP.NET Core applications on Linux or on Mac OS, so you can use Entity Framework in a cross-platform environment. I'll show a demo for how it's running on Linux. There are other features. The very important feature is extensibility, because it widens the scope which Entity Framework of features which Entity Framework can provide, and we'll see there are a lot of new providers coming to Entity Framework. The thing that it's lightweight is also very good, because if you want to use this on a mobile device or on some tablet where you don't have 8 GB of memory like on a server, it's very important that this technology is much more lightweight than the classic Entity Framework. Maybe if you were watching what the Entity Framework team does, originally this name should be Entity Framework 7, but then since they had to also rename the .NET Core, so they create the name Entity Framework Core. So it's not number 7, because it's not an evolution from version 6, it's a revolution. It's not complete, but it's a kind of significant rewrite of most of the code base of Entity Framework. So they choose another name, and it's starting at version 1, because it's similar, but it's not the same. It's not incremental adding features. It's a rewrite. Something's missing, something is new in comparison to Entity Framework 6. So why they brought the new version? The most important point was the support of .NET Core, but still in a classic Entity Framework, the code base is pretty old. Do you remember the year when first version of Entity Framework came? It was something like 2007, 2008. Yeah, so the code base is quite old, and it uses some API of .NET Framework, which is not portable. Also, there is quite mess, because there are two APIs for querying the database. There is object context. If you remember the first version of Entity Framework and those designers, those EDMX models, then it's object context API. It's quite old, and it's still present in EF6. Even if you use DB context, the API is still there. And the new API, which was introduced in Entity Framework, I think 4.2 or something like that. So this is a new API which everybody is using now. And even if you are using the designer in Visual Studio and the diagrams, it's in EF6, it's translated to DB context APIs. But still, if you need some advanced feature like access the model metadata, you can use the interface called Object Context Adapter, which can create object context from DB context. So the old API is still there, and sometimes you need it. And that's kind of messy, and they wanted to get rid of this in new Entity Framework. Also, the problem is that the Entity Framework, the classic one, is a monolithic library. It's one library, and it's not very easy to extend. Most of the I know many people who wanted the hierarchy ID support in Entity Framework, and someday some branch appeared on their GitHub, or at that time it was Codeplex. So somebody implemented this feature, and if you look at the change set, there are about a very large number of changes, and there are some switch statements, there is switch column type, and they had to add a new branch. If the type of the column is hierarchy ID, then do something. And it's in many files in the Entity Framework code base. So the extensibility for support, for example, of new data types is not very easy, and that's one of the concerns Microsoft had in creating Entity Framework Core, so it would be much easier to extend. And the next issue is that the classic Entity Framework has quite high memory footprint. The original idea was that Entity Framework will be used on server environment, so you have a lot of memory on servers typically, and if you want to run an application on a mobile device where you have low memory environment, it would be a problem. So that's the reason why Entity Framework Core is lightweight, because not it's optimized for mobile devices, but it was developed with thinking about supporting these platforms. So they made sure that it will be possible to run it on mobile device. EF Core brings several new features. For example, one of the most interesting, which can dramatically boost the performance, is batching. If you insert 100 of entities into some DB set and call save changes, originally the classic Entity Framework sends command by command. Insert, 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 insert. And after each insert, it has to pick up the ID which was assigned by the database, so it's not possible to easily do batching. EF Core can do batching, and it batches everything together, so it should be faster. Another new feature you can try right now, it's working, is alternate keys, and it means that even, for example, if you have the users table, there is some ID, which is an integer, but users use, for example, email address or username, like unique identifier of the entity. So you can tell to Entity Framework that, yes, there is a primary key, which is ID, identity 11, or something like that, and also there is alternate key, for example, the username, which also must be unique. And if you want to create a relationship to user, you can choose if the end of the relationship is ID or username. It wasn't possible in EF6. You only could create a relationship which ends on primary key. So now you have alternate key, and if you mark some column as alternate key, it can be end of the relationship. Also, the querying mechanisms were changed in EF Core. In original entity framework, there was an assumption that you get a LINQ query, you can write a LINQ query, and it gets translated to SQL or to any language that the database is using. But the idea was that whole LINQ query will be translated into one query. So this is kind of restricting, and EF Core supports much more complicated scenarios. For example, the database provider can decide whether it will run it as one query, or whether it can split the query into, for example, 2 SQL queries and combine the results in memory. Or, and it will be much more widely used case, it can take a part of the query, evaluate it in the database, so translate to SQL, get the results from the database, and the rest of the query will be calculated in memory. Also, EF Core thinks about non-relational database stores, so there will be support for Azure Table Storage or Redis or any other key value storage or simple non-relation storages. Maybe there will be providers in the future for more popular databases. And also there is one provider which can store data in memory. So if you want to test your applications, you can use this in-memory store. Be careful, it's not 100% the same behavior as in the database. For example, if you compare strings, then if the string is case, or if the comparison is case or case sensitive or case insensitive, it doesn't depend on your culture, it depends on collation on the database column. If you use the in-memory provider, the case sensitivity in the comparison could be different. So it's not 100% the same. Also, null values behave differently in the database. If you compare something to null, and the something is also null, in database world, null doesn't equal null. In .NET, null equals null. So there will be some differences, but for testing simple scenarios, yes, you can, instead of real database, you can test against some in-memory collections, and EF Core supports also this scenario. I've been talking about the fact that EF Core can evaluate only a part of the query on the database and calculate the rest in memory, and this is the feature. So if you have this query, so I'm querying the products table. I'm interested only in products which are not discontinued. And now I want to select name of the product and items on stock, but I want to, not an integer, I want a string which is already formatted for the users so he can see the number nicely formatted. And of course, this getDisplayText function is not present on database. It can be translated in SQL. And the client evaluation feature makes Entity Framework get all the data he needs to evaluate this expression. And when he has the data, he will call this function for every returned row and calculate the rest. Of course, you must be very careful while using this feature, because if you want client evaluation, for example here, and you will have 2 million of products, then all will get retrieved from the database before the condition is applied. So you have to make sure that you are using the client evaluation reasonably and only in last select clause, not in the middle of query. In some cases, it will be possible, and Entity Framework will report a warning. And you can set it up that the client evaluation can be turned off completely. So if you try a client evaluation in the query, you can set it up that it will throw in an exception. So you can be sure that you are not making a mistake. But if you are using this only in the last select clause and you don't access many of the properties which would require, for example, lazy loading, it should be possible to use this without so much fear. So this is the client evaluation. It's quite interesting feature. And the next change in EF Core is that only the code first will be supported. Actually, the name code first is not very accurate, because you don't have to write your code model first. You can have the database already, and you can generate your code first model from the database. So the code actually is not first, the database is first. They had the two modes of working with EF entity framework, code first and database first. And by database first, they meant the EDMX designer. But currently in EF Core, only the code first is supported, but it doesn't mean that you cannot generate your model from the database. There is a command line tool which can do that. So the better name would be, for example, code-based modeling, which means that your model is described in C# code. So there will be no EDMX designer support, so the only way you can use is the code first, and you can write your model from scratch, or you can generate it from database. The .NET command line utility has an extension EF, so if you write .NET EF DB context scaffold, sorry, it's quite long, then you have to write a connection string to the database and name of the provider, for example, entityframework.sql server or something like that. And it will generate the code first model for you from existing database. So you can choose what's better for you. There is something which some features are missing, so it's if you need some of these features, you should wait with EF Core adoption. So one of the things which will be dropped and it will never be implemented in EF Core is old object context API. So this old API will not be there, and I'm quite happy about it, because it wasn't really good. The DB context API was much cleaner. There are many features which will be there, possibly, or most probably, but they are either in implementation or they haven't started on them already. So, as you remember, there are 3 inheritance types which you can use in the model: table per hierarchy, table per type, and table per class. So only table per hierarchy is supported right now in EF Core, and they are working on introducing those 2 types. EF6 supported all 3 of them. Also, if you need many-to-many relationship, you can do it, but you have to create the table in the middle by yourself. Currently, you cannot just you can just skip this and let Entity Framework create it for you. In 6, it worked. In EF Core, you will have to wait until they implement this feature, or create the table in the middle by yourself. Actually, it's a good idea to create a table in the middle by yourself every time, because you never know when you need to store additional data in this table, for example, date when the relationship was created. So for the in the long-term view, it's much better to specify the entity in the middle by yourself. Also, complex types are not supported yet, or if you use the spatial data, some geography or geolocation types in SQL Server, also it's not supported yet. And lazy loading works, but only in very simple scenarios, so they are still working on this feature. And also there's explicit loading. You can say which you have retrieved some entity from the database, and you need to load its related data to it. So explicit loading is also not supported yet. And also stored procedures and things like that are also not supported yet. So you have only the important features in the EF Core, but still there are some features which we were used to it and which are still missing. I don't want to frighten you much, so I will show what's same and what remained. So the syntax of LINQ queries is the same. There is nothing changed about it. Also, the API of DB context, so DB context class is the same. DB sets have the add remove methods. It's also the same as it was. DB context database object, which you could use to set some configuration values to database or call SQL queries manually. And DB context change tracker also, it's the same. There are not many changes, some small APIs missing, but the most important features are here. This code on the right side of the slide, it works in EF6 and in EF Core. And so most of the code in your application, if you are not using anything special, if you are only using the standard things like adding entities to tables or querying the database using the include statement and such things, it will work. Yeah? And there will be no changes in this. The only change, if you are writing this type of code, the only change will be on startup because the configuration of Entity Framework Core is different. But that's the only change. Most of the changes are inside, not in your application code. So that's kind of good news. And I have a sample application, so we can see what's different. OK, so I will try to run it first. It's a simple forum for posting comments. So there are a forums table and forum threads table, forum posts, or something like that. It's kind of easy. And it's a very easy application, but it demonstrates the features of Entity Framework. So let's look at the database model. So here we have the app DB context class. I'm using ASP.NET Identity library for authentication and storing user credentials in database. So I'm not inheriting the actual DB context. I'm inheriting the identity DB context, which inherits the DB context somewhere inside the library. But it's still an implementation of DB context. In the constructor, there is a small change. In EF6, there was a string parameter which contained the connection string or name of the connection string from the configuration. Since the configuration model in ASP.NET Core is different, so this API has changed. There is something called DB context options, which is an object you can give the connection string inside this object. And the DB set definition of tables are the same public virtual DB set of something. And if I open the forum thread class, you can see that this is exactly the same as in classic Entity Framework. So there is ID, which is automatically marked as primary key. I don't have to put the key attribute there. There is a string property title, which uses using the attribute. It specifies its maximum length. There is a created date, and there is a collection of related entities, forum posts, because in each forum thread there is a lot of posts with the crazy GIFs, avatars of the users. So it's a collection of forum posts. And if I open the forum posts, it's also the same as you would use Entity Framework 6. So you can see primary key, the two columns which are the second direction of the relationship. So the forum posts knows ID of the forum thread, and also there is a navigation property forum thread. There is a message of the forum post. Created date, and also there is a relationship to user who posted this message. So the logic and the model looks pretty much the same as in EF6. Okay, so now I have a class called forum service, which contains several methods I need in this application. For example, a function called load forum posts, where I pass forum thread ID, and it queries the entity framework. So you can see that the querying syntax is also same like in EF6. So I'm querying the forum posts table, some where's order by, and I select some object which I'm returning from the method. If I want to create a new forum thread, you can see that I can create a new instance of forum thread, and also I can directly fill this collection forum posts. It also worked in EF6, so if I do the same here, it also works, and the forum thread ID will be set automatically by entity framework, so you don't have to care about it. You just give it some entities which are connected using navigation properties, and everything gets saved correctly. So it's working, and it should work the same way as in previous version. If I don't want to create a thread, I want to add post to an existing thread, you can see the code is also very easy. So there is no big change in this. The only thing which is different is the startup. And here I configure a lot of different services. And in the startup class in .NET Core or ASP.NET Core projects, there are two methods. One of them is configure services. So you have to configure the DB context as a service. So I say services at DB context, which is an extension method. And here in the options, I say use SQL Server. So it's using Microsoft SQL Server, and I can specify the connection string. I could put it into the configuration file and load it from configuration, but to keep this demo simple, I have just hard-coded it into the C# file. So you have to register the DB context as a service, and then if you have, for example, an MVC controller, you can, in the constructor, you can require a parameter of type appDBContext, and it will be injected by the framework itself. So you don't have to call new appDBContext. You just create a parameter in the constructor of your controller, and you will get an instance of DB-context. And it will get disposed automatically when the HTTP request ends, so you don't have to care about it. You just, in the constructor, you just specify what you need, and the new ASP.NET Core infrastructure will inject the correct instance in the constructor. So it's much more easier. You don't have to. In simple cases, you don't have to take care about when the context is created and how it's disposed. It's done automatically for you. Of course, if you have more complex scenario, you will have to make sure that you dispose the context. But in the simple demo applications where you do everything in the controller, it just works. Okay, so that's how it works in ASP.NET Core. And if I open the project.json, you can see that I'm referencing here in the dependencies section, I need these NuGet packages. And you can see that if you use original EF6, the package name is just Entity Framework. Here, it's Microsoft.EntityFramework Core, so it's a different NuGet package. It's completely new logic of naming of the packages, and it's starting from version 1. 1.01 is the current stable version. And Microsoft Entity Framework Core is a common core for all database providers. It's the library itself. And Microsoft Entity Framework SQL Server is a provider for Microsoft SQL Server database. Also, if you want to use the tooling that was on the slides, .NET EF, DB context scaffold, and for example, let the model generate from the database. You also have to include the package Microsoft Entity Framework Core tools, which extends the .NET EXE with this functionality. So you have to reference this tools package, and also you have to specify it in the tools section, so it will get enabled, and you can use .NET EF something. So that's how the packages look like. Okay. As a developers, we often struggle with having the database schema updated, and there are many ways how to migrate or update the schema of the database. If you used in Entity Framework, if you used EDMX model, it wasn't really reliable. You changed something in the database and opened the designer, waited for about 20 seconds until it loaded or something like that. Then you right-click, waited 5 seconds until the menu appeared. Then you said update model from database. And it was looking in the database, comparing the database with the model, and apply the changes. For example, if it finds new tables, it will add them in the model. The problem was that it wasn't 100% reliable. In my experience, that wasn't even 90% reliable. And if you did any manual changes in the model, you probably lose them because it couldn't synchronize the model. So if you, for example, changed some relationship or something like that, you had to do it again and again because this feature just could just break things down. Also, if two people in the team changed the model in EDMX, you couldn't merge it. You just delete it and update model from database, and if the model is empty, it will be done correctly. So it's a lot of work, which is not very compelling. So Entity Framework had code-first migrations, where you did some changes into your code-first model and just typed add migration and update database to the package manager console, and it worked somehow. Also, there were problems in the team environment. Maybe a question, who is using Entity Framework migrations? About 1/3 of the people. Okay, so there are some problems in the team environment. If you have two people who add a migration and then you commit, it works somehow. But if somebody else runs the migrations, it will break, and one of the migrations won't get executed. And the reason is that the migration has to take a snapshot of the database schema. So they take the schema of the database, they serialize it in JSON or something like that. They gzip the schema, so it's a binary value, and they write it in base 64, and this was in the resx files, which came with the migration C# files in the same directory. And if you try to merge it, good luck. Yeah, because it's compressed and it's base 64 encoded. So that's a problem, and also you had to remove the migrations and do one migration that introduces both changes together or something like that. In EF Core, the migrations work similarly. The command line syntax is different, and you don't launch it from package manager console. You need to go to actual command line. But the snapshot of the database model is not gzipped, and it's not a binary value. It's a C# code, which can be merged quite easily. So even if two people now, in this new version, add a migration, there is a quite big chance that everything gets merged correctly and that it will work. So there will be much less problems you will have to work on when using migrations. Okay, so let's look how the migrations work. So I have used migrations in this demo. So I have already already run the first command, .NET EF migrations at, and I typed here as a name of the migration, initial create. We just take a whole model and create a migration so I can create the database. The database can be created for me. So the first migration, we can see that the syntax is almost the same as it was. There is a different class in EF. It was called DB migration, and this API is also a little bit different, but the principle is still the same. So I can see all my tables are getting created with foreign keys and all relationships. And if I want to uninstall this migration from the database, also you can see that the code drops all the tables from here. So, and this file, appdb context model snapshot, that's the thing I was talking about. That's a snapshot of the database model. So it's also generated for you. You don't have to write this. It's generated for you. And you can see that whole model, how the database exactly looks like, is specified here. And the migrations are compared, if you do changes with the model, it's compared to this file, so the database can even be offline. Yeah? You don't need the database to create migrations. It wasn't be possible in EF6. Yeah, so this is the snapshot of the model, and if two people do some migrations, this file will change, and there is a very high chance that it will merge correctly because it's C# code, and if it doesn't merge, if there are some conflicts, it shouldn't be so difficult to make it correctly. So this is much better than it was in a previous version of Entity Framework. I can do some change in the model. For example, if the forum thread has a title, but I can also put their description, so I can write string description. And now I can run the .NET EF migrations at, and it will create a migration for me. So let's open the project. This one, and this is the root directory of the project. So I am running a command line from here, and I can say .NET EF migrations at, and for example, forum thread description, and it will compile the application and generate a migration. So I can look into this directory. We can see there is a new file, and you can see that description, and also it's altering column because I have added the string length attribute after created the migration, so it's my mistake. But you can see that it detected the changes which I've made in the view model and generated a migration. And now I can run .NET EF database update, and it will install all the remaining migrations in the database. So if it detects that some migration is not installed, it will install it. If I want to recreate some migration, I can say .NET EF migrations remove, and it will remove the last migration, so I can generate it once more. If I see that there are some issues and I don't want to fix them manually, I can just remove the last migration, do the change in the model, and generate it again. Also, there are some parameters, so there is something like -force, like in previous framework. So this will remove the migration. Yeah, you can see the Visual Studio automatically detected the file has disappeared and reloaded this folder, refreshed, so it's there. So I have to remove the changes in my model, like this. And now if I would add migration, it will be empty. There will be no changes in the model. So that's a slight change. And also, Entity Framework course comes with several providers. Some of them are not by Microsoft. Only the first two are by Microsoft, and in-memory provider is created by the Entity Framework team. The rest of them are from community, and also there are some which are paid, but there are more providers coming. And so we have the Microsoft SQL Server and SQLite. These are working. You can try them now. There are also a lot of other providers. You can see, for example, MySQL has 2 providers, one official and one from the community. Also, there is a community provider for Microsoft SQL Server Compact. It's from community. It's not from Microsoft. And the others are also from community. A provider for Oracle is not ready yet. It will come soon. Now you can use the DevArt, but I'm not sure. But I don't know if it's even free. But these are the relation database providers, and also they are working on Azure Table Storage provider and Redis provider. So these are not relational database. There are something like key value store or document databases or something like that. So also there will be providers for these type of databases, but they are still in progress, so we'll have to wait for them. And I want to show you that Entity Framework is really a thing which runs on multiple platforms. So I have took this application I have showed to you, and I have done only very tiny changes. I have changed this project JSON, and instead of SQL Server, I have changed it to SQLite. That's one of the changes. And the second change is the startup, which doesn't say use SQL Server. It says use SQLite, and the connection string looks different because in SQLite it's something like file name equals and path to the DB file on the disk. And that's it. That's the only change. And if you do this change and copy this project to a Linux machine and get .NET Core running there, you will be able to run this application on Linux. So I hope my virtual machine in Azure started. Yeah, it looks like it's running. So I can connect to it using this terminal client called Putty. And I hope it will work. No, because this internet blocks some ports, but never mind. I can connect to a VPN, and if I do it, it should work. So I can connect to my VPN in my office in Prague, and when I connect, oh. Okay, so let's try it again. Okay, so I'm sorry, I can't show you this. I can try it again. Maybe it was some temporary issue, but this. No, it cannot connect because it's on not on a port which is not 80, and I think all the ports except of 80 and 443 are blocked. So I cannot connect to this machine. But the only changes is that I say use SQLite here. So it's something like I have to install this SQLite package. So this, when I save the file, the packages will get restored for me. So the SQL Server will be uninstalled, and SQLite will be installed. Restoring packages. Okay, and that's it. And now in the startup, this extension method no longer exists because it's defined in the package I've just removed. And if I say options, use SQLite, which is an extension method, and I can say the connection string here, so file name equals forum db. Yeah, I have to close this parenthesis too, so there should be 2 of them. And that should be the only change. Also, the syntax of migrations is different for each database. So I should remove the migrations because they are not compatible between each database providers. So I would have to recreate the migrations too. And that's it. And when I compile the project, you can see the build succeeded. It still works. And when I run .NET EF database update, it should create the SQLite database for me. So if I navigate to the bin debug netcore app directory, we can see there is a file called forum.db, which is the SQLite database. And if I run the application, it will work. Yeah, so I'm running the application now. Oh, sorry. I don't have migrations here. Maybe I have to create a migration also. So .NET EF migrations at initial create. So it will generate migration. Oh, I have to stop the IIS because it can't access the DLL. So once more. Okay, so the migration is generated. We can see that it looks a little bit different. And now, if I write .NET EF database update, it should update the database and install the migrations there. Okay, and I hope that it will work now. Okay, the problem here, yeah, it works, and it's retrieved from the SQLite database. Yeah, I can say that this file gets bigger. It was 12 kilobytes. Now it's 114 kilobytes. So it's bigger. It's because the tables and data are installed here. If you wonder how I inserted data into the tables, I have a class called appdbinitializer, which can initialize database async, which ensures the database is created, and also calls the create users and create forum threads methods, so I can seed the database with some data. Yeah? So this is the mechanism, and you can also turn this initializer into startup. So I am somewhere, yeah, I'm registering appdbinitializer class, and it will automatically get run and make sure that all the data for this demo are in the database. It must to be written in that way that it's reentrant, that you can run it several times and it must work. So I'm checking if the user exists, and if not, I'm creating it. But I have to check if it's not there, because otherwise there will be tons of users, because this can be run on each application startup. Yeah. So that's the SQLite support, and it would work the same way with any database provider which supports EF Core. Okay, so what about future? Currently, Microsoft is preparing and working on the version EF Core 1.1, and there will be many interesting things. So the LINQ translation will be greatly improved. I have one more demo. If I look in the forum service, I have this query here. It's quite long, but I'm querying the forum threads and selecting something. Yeah, and I'm here in the select clause. I access the navigation properties, and this piece of code works, and this piece of code which does the same thing, it doesn't work, and it throws some exception from the core of entity framework. In some internal collection, they didn't find some metadata. And the only reason is that first or default is at the end. And here the first or default is behind the order by descending, and then I am accessing this. So some constructions, some constructs in the queries are still not working, and typically you have to rewrite the query so it does the same thing, but in a different way, and it will work. So it's kind of black magic because not everything is implemented and not everything is running, but they are still working on it, so it's improving with each new version. Also, method dbset.find, which you give primary key and it will find the entity, it will be here. They have explicit loading prepared, and also you have the entity entry API. If you called dbcontext.entry, give it an entity, you will get an object representing the original values of the properties of the entity, new and current values, if the entity is modified or deleted, or the entity state. And there are also these things you can, for example, reload. So you can do some changes in the entity, and then you can reload the original values from the database, etc. Also, connection resiliency, which you need in, for example, Azure environment. It's kind of a retry logic on database connect operation. So if, for example, in Azure, if the database is migrated to another physical machine, the connections can still remain, and they will not work. So the resiliency makes some retry logic, and if the connection is not working, it will create a new one, and it will try again until it can work. The next thing is pluralization. If you have the English names of tables in database, and you generate model from database, the names remained, so the class could be called products, which is not very convenient because you want the class to be named product. And this pluralization API wasn't in the first version of EF Core. Now it will be there, and it should be extensible. So if you have the names of the tables in the Polish or other language, you can write your own pluralizer which will deal with this situation. And they promise that they will have RTM tooling. And when I said at the start of this session that EF might be dead, it won't be dead. They have plans for Entity Framework 6.2, and if you look at their GitHub, they have about 2 pages of issues which they are assigned to the 6.2 milestone. So very probably most of the issues will be resolved, and they will release a new version of Entity Framework. So, the question, to upgrade or not to upgrade. If you want to use new platforms like universal Windows platforms, or you want to play with ASP.NET Core on Linux or Mac or any other platform, try it, because it works for simple scenarios, it's okay. If you want to write a complex application with difficult queries and advanced features, you need to stay with Entity Framework 6 for now, but the ASP.NET Core libraries could be used also from the full .NET Framework. So I think for new projects, the ideal combination is stay on full .NET Framework for some time, but use new ASP.NET Core libraries because the migration to .NET Core will be much more easier if you need it someday. You don't have to upgrade. If you remember, for example, platforms like VB6, which was released in 1998. It's still working. Many companies are still writing applications in this. This same applies for the classic .NET Framework, so you don't have to worry that .NET Framework is dead, that it will not be supported on next version of Windows. There is so much software running on full .NET that full .NET will be here for next 20 years at least. So I wouldn't worry. For new project, I would use full .NET Framework with ASP.NET Core libraries, because if I want to migrate someday to .NET Core or from classic EF to EF Core, it will be easier than rebuilding the whole project to the new libraries. So if you want to try EF Core, look at this page, which contains a table which features are already supported in .NET Core. I hope it will load someday. OK. Here it goes. OK, so I'll make it bigger. And here are a list of features, and then here is a table, so you can see in which state which feature is. They are the third from the top. You can see that in EF Core it's only partially supported, so you can use this table to determine if the EF Core has everything you will need to create your application. For simple scenarios, for some mobile apps or universal apps for tablets, I think the list of features is enough for such kind of applications. For big corporate applications, I would wait with EF Core adoption, but you could see that the most of the application code remains the same. So the change will be there, but it won't be so much difficult. And I don't know if you have to upgrade. If you even have to upgrade, you could stay with EF6 because there will be some development on EF6 too. OK, so that's all. If you have any questions, I will be happy to answer. And I'd like to invite you to a session I'm having later this day about a framework called .vvm, which allows you writing web apps without writing JavaScript. OK?